This is Dialogue Conspiracy. Political research specialist Mae Brussell, whose conspiracy newsletter appears in the Realist magazine, has for 3 years shared with our listeners the fruits of her decades' research into political assassinations and the abuses of power in America. Her weekly commentary relates the news of the week to the evidence emerging about the conspiracy which allegedly maintains its power by force over America's electoral and executive processes. And now, here's Mae.
Good afternoon and Dialogue Conspiracy, Monday, May the 20th. It's hard for me to do the show this week. I don't think that in the years that I've done research into political assassinations, I felt quite as badly as I did this last weekend when I saw the war coming closer to home. I've worked very hard for 10 years researching the political conspiracies in this country, the assassination of President John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, 200-300 other Whitney Young, musicians, rock stars, you name it, judges, writers, civil rights leaders, the outline of a book, Murderville, USA. But the blood just keeps flowing on, and it comes in living color on your television. And the news media is called in preparation for the event by a public relations firm in Los Angeles, so you can sit at home and watch 6 people be burned alive inside of a building. I spoke about Donald DeFreeze on many shows in the Bay Area in April. I was speaking about him. I had a solution for the whole thing. He easily could have been understood, adopted, given a home. The game of death could have been ended and over without the help of the law enforcement agencies. They were pushed into this corner, and those people were killed, and there will be more killings. And what you saw burning in Los Angeles is a sample. If my predictions are right, as right as they've been before, you'll see every 10th home on fire within 2 or 3 years in this country, like that scene in Los Angeles, if we allow these people to get away with what they are doing. It was a cold-blooded assault, an attack, 500 police officers. The accounts range between 400 to 500 police officers, special task squads. The fire department was not allowed to enter a building at 2,000-degree temperature. 1 black man, 5 women, and a pet cat. And they all died. The most disgusting scene, and I have many things I want to talk about, and we'll try to touch a few of them. March 15th in the LA Star, I had an article called "The SLA is the CIA." It has to do with the behavior modification programs in our prison, the CIA in our prisons, the National Security Council giving authority to the police department in Los Angeles and other police departments up and down the state of California that allowed this monster thing to happen. April the 7th, I published an article in the Berkeley Barb called "Is SLA Sin Q the First Black Lee Harvey Oswald?" And on the first page of that paper, it said, "The whole nation will be involved in Patty's fate, and they will sacrifice her. Donald DeFreeze and Thurl Wheeler would be the patsies." Wheeler has not surfaced. He is somewhere, I don't know where. There was a second black man in that house, and he left before it was burned down. I went on to say that Donald DeFreeze would be the main patsy, the first black Lee Harvey Oswald. He would wind up dead. He would be sacrificed. He would have to die. The intelligence agencies behind the plot didn't plan that Patty Hearst, Donald DeFreeze, and Thurl Wheeler would survive and tell their story. The whole plot for the paramilitary takeover of the United States might come out in the open if the truth is revealed about that kidnapping. And I went on to say many more people will be murdered, and they will. May the 10th, there was a press conference in San Francisco at the law office of Charles Gary. Those of you that listen to Dialogue Conspiracy know that we played the entire press conference on my program last week because I didn't want to delete it. I wanted to show you what the major news media hears but doesn't carry. The Associated Press, United Press, the LA Times, the Washington Post, it's supposed to be so understanding and investigative in its research. Leroy Aarons was there. New York Times carried it. The story they carried went into their issue this Friday, the same Friday that Donald DeFreeze was murdered by the LA Police Department that had used him in previous work as an agent provocateur informer for them. The same day that the story broke in New York, Donald DeFreeze was being burned alive in California. There was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle about Donald DeFreeze on May the 13th, and then the following day they had an article, Donald DeFreeze letter to a judge. And I think maybe to think of him as a human being and used by our police agencies, I may spend a good share of the program just reading where his mind was at when he was sent to jail and before they sent him to Vacaville, to behave in a way that his mind was controlled, that he would be this great leader. The inconsistency of his being Martin Luther King or Malcolm X is ridiculous. The Muslims are not armed, and Malcolm X was not armed. So the great machine gun trip and the weapon trip, at the same time his head being told he's a hero in the image of the nonviolent leaders while shooting out, is totally inconsistent. His brain was scrambled, and the boy was meeting with agents of the Central Intelligence Agency that work in our prison system, and they created that heroic figure that was forced to die in Los Angeles. There's a lot of things that run through my mind. One of them is a story in the LA Times. It said, "The battle plan that crushed the SLA," and it's written by Jerry Cohn. He's the same Jerry Cohn on the desk. They have departments there, you know, like food and news and sports and so forth. Jerry Cohn is the conspiracy writer. He's the man who doesn't explore the Tackwood allegations, who can ignore them if he thinks they're right. He doesn't put them down, but he ignores the leads. He's the one who tells you that Sirhan killed Robert Kennedy or that Lee Harvey Oswald killed President John Kennedy. And Jerry Cohn waits. He doesn't put anything about the evidence that Donald DeFreeze could be a police agent or worked with the Attorney General Evel Young or the police department or what happened to him at Vacaville or who let him escape from Soledad and who didn't pick him up in Berkeley in the 10 months since he escaped that allowed all these things to take place. Nothing, no investigative reporting of that kind. But when it's all over, when their particular man is dead, he writes an article called "The Battle Plan That Crushed the SLA," and you may want to hear how he describes the battle, the siege that took place down there. The same day, on May the 18th, Los Angeles Times has an article. A policeman calls back to the command post and says there's a black man with a rifle believed to be inside. They weren't even sure that there was. And the radio message was, "If you see him, nail him." And that meant get Donald DeFreeze. That doesn't mean save the others or bring them out alive so we can question them. In other words, to find out who the SLA is or what's on their mind, or to understand what was happening with this group. The UCLA School of Study of Violence only studies dead patsies and then emulates theories. They make up these big theories about the causes of violence after the main patsies that are used are locked up in jail. They want to have an institute to study violence, and they still are squeaking for it. And I know that this big scene of violence in LA will give them an excuse all the more to study violence, not the violence of a police order that says if you see him, nail him. Not to protect him, but if there's a man in there, nail him. And that's what they were after. They didn't care who else was in the house. Well, the story of the battle plan was that some woman had 5 grandchildren that were staying with her, and they shared this cottage, and one of them saw a white woman and a strange black man and white man sitting on the floor. Now, I don't know why he would be strange to them. It's a black part of town, and what was so strange about him? This was the excuse to go in. And they had, she said, guns and ammunition. And the children reported this to the woman who told the police that she was worried that there was somebody in the cottage with guns and ammunition. So at 2 o'clock, at 2 p.m. on Friday, the big roll call room at the Newton Street Police Division Station House was the scene for a momentous meeting. Present were top-level police officers, including Assistant Chief Darrell Gates and perhaps a half a dozen FBI, including William Sullivan, in charge of the federal agency's LA office. For almost an hour, they talked and planned, thrashing out a course of action and deciding when to put it into operation. Now, all they knew was that there was a strange-looking black man with these women sitting on the floor, and the child said there were some weapons. Commander Hagen, the department's public relations chief, arrived with an aide, Officer Harold Webster. Hagen was present because he had been informed by a colleague that an operation is coming down that will require a public relations spokesman. Now, Louis Tackwood, in his book, The Glass House Tapes, published by Avon Press, tells you that the office called Public Relations in the Los Angeles Police Department is the head of the criminal conspiracy section that's linked up and down this state, that is tied up to the White House, the higher echelons of government, and that is a cover. The public relations is a cover. But these men were not prepared to save lives, save homes, property, neighborhood, or anything. Their first job was to call a public relations spokesman, and they certainly did a good job of that. It says Hagen recalls it was Captain Marvin King, the commander of the Investigative Headquarters Bureau, who crystallized the thinking of the men in the roll call room and said, well, we'll get in on it this evening. And they were placed in charge of the impending operation. The meeting broke up at 3 o'clock. A command post was established, 57th Street in Compton. The command post was a black and white station wagon with maps, ultra-modern communications equipment, and the police units throughout had special radio frequencies, and 150 LA policemen, 100 FBI agents, 100 sheriff's officers, 15 California Highway Patrol were to be on duty in the neighborhood. Now, with that many people on duty in the neighborhood, all they had to do was stake out the place for 2 weeks, and somebody would have come out. The SLA has not done the violence that they would have you believe, and no, they didn't give them a chance to stake it out. They decided the Public Relations Office was called, and that many people were ready. The command post was set up, and they had their quarters. The first to arrive at the post were 3 special weapons and tactics teams, the SWAT team, a total of 20 policemen, and they would be the officers exposed to gunfire if it came. They donned special overalls, flak vests, each carried semi-automatic weapons. The FBI came in with flak vests, and the agents got down on the ground ready for the actions. At 5:15, the first units, left by Captain King and Sullivan, moved out of a parking lot, followed by a horde of newspaper reporters, photographers, television, and radio crews. This is like Jack Ruby killing Lee Harvey Oswald in the Camry. The police would not feel guilty for killing Donald DeFreeze at this point. If you watch it on television, they feel they have nothing to hide. And they had called in hordes of newspaper reporters to get ready for the action, photographers, televisions, radio crews. If they expected shooting or action, there's no reason, absolutely no reason at all for this scene to be televised, for people to see it. They're testing your tolerance, like in Nazi Germany or the concentration camps or whatever. How much can you tolerate of watching these people burn inside this house? Because keep in mind, they didn't even know who was in the house by their own admission. And I'll read you some of the articles. They didn't know how many or who, but everything. The Public Relations Office was set up, the newspaper reporters, the television, and the radio crews, and scores of other media representatives, having learned by various means by the FBI and the police, their destination was known, and they appeared. And at 5:15, the officers approached, rifles poised. Another with a flak vest stood in front of the house. Neighbors and newsmen watched. Now, the newsmen, whose number later estimated 100, were all there. Many reporters arrived in time to see an officer point a bullhorn at the residence and hear him order its occupants to come out. Now, it says many arrived on time to see him point a bullhorn, but the next day there wasn't a person who heard the bullhorn warning. There was no witness on the street that said they heard the bullhorn warning. And then it says 2 minutes later, a member of the SWAT team stuck directly in front of the cottage, leveled a gas gun at it, and fired into it, and a tear gas grenade shadowed the window. From then, a deafening fusillade of